All right, so this second part of this, I don't even know what to title it, to be honest. I don't even have a title of it yet, but you know, you're gonna find it. You'll find the first part online. They'll be linked in in the description. But uh, here we go. So all this humanitarian. No, we just got done talking about her father being a colonel under this regime and that killed between 50 and 200,000 civilians. Mass. In mass. Okay, what did it say? The mass summary executions. Mass summary executions and international cutting off of food and water lines. All this USAID humanitarian aid was going there, but they were cutting them off. This regime was. Her father was a colonel of that regime. And somehow he didn't get charged. And that's another thing that we just talked about. He didn't get charged. The legal reality is he didn't get charged. And then they went from Kenya, it went from Somalia to Kenya with all the military and USAID and NGOs and well, the military came back to the United States. I'm not saying that. I mean, some of them might have went to Kenya. Don't know. But that wasn't in any of the descriptions here. But they went with USAID and where they started doing everything in Kenya. Consequently, same place that Obama has ties to, publicly. Okay, publicly, no. And I asked, were they Christians because of all of the TV shows and stuff had commercials for people trying to provide aid for these people, and they were all Christian organizations. So I thought, well, maybe they must be Christian then. No, but no, apparently not. They're just Christians were trying to help people. Like, you know, you can hate Christianity all you want, but the whole Red Cross and every kind of humanitarian aid exists because of Christians. And if it wasn't for Christians, there wouldn't be humanitarian aid in the world. Okay? There wouldn't be anything going on in these war-torn areas. All right? So, and any country that's not Christian that goes to those areas, well, they're basically competing with and trying to live up to the standard that Christians in America created when Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders and some of these other organizations and lots of these other organizations, Christian organizations, Haiti and all these other missions around, they started doing around the world because that's the mission. That's exactly why Christianity exists. And consequently, that happened all the way from the beginning when Puritans and everybody came over from Europe. Okay, and that's all. I'm going to stop right there because I'm going to end up going down there. But no, they were not Muslim, okay? They were not Christian, they were Muslim. The brutal campaigns carried out by the Siad Barre regime had nothing to do with religion, as Somalia is historically one of the most religiously homogeneous nations in the world, with 90% practicing Sunni Islam. Huh. Well, isn't that interesting? That's weird. Instead, the conflict was driven entirely by clan warfare, political survival, and control over resources. Well, who wanted those resources? Why is China in Somalia? Why is China, as I gave as was at the beginning of this in the other video? Why are they so interested in tariff-free exports from Somalia? What does Somalia have that's so important to China? I mean, they lack food and water. It's not agriculture. I don't know. Tell me. You tell me. It must be something to do with tech, some minerals. Instead, okay. So it was driven by clan warfare. So apparently Barre and Ilhan Omar's father wanted to go murder all of these people so that the reigning government that they were in control of, the regime, could have access to sell those minerals to other countries and nations, apparently. The regime, well, they were all Muslim, Sunnis. Civilians and rebel groups targeted by the military, such as the Isaac clan in the north, and the Hawaii clan in the south, were also completely Muslim. The real driving force. Relied on a coalition of clans. Kind of like, anyway, to maintain absolute power, targeted clans. Okay, so he had his favorites, and he had those people he didn't like, and blah, blah, blah. Regime's response. In response to these rebellions, the military did not look at religious identity. Instead, they collectively punished entire population of sinners based on their clan. So, if you're white, we're going to hate you. Because we see America as WASP and European, we're going to hate America and what it stands for. Wow. Doesn't it sound the same? And isn't this Ilhan Omar's rhetoric? It's the same. It's the same rhetoric. All these years later, we're getting a product of everything that his regime did to cause humanitarian crisis in his own country. And we have the product of that in Congress. Just because America is heavily populated by whites, she hates America. Why are you in Congress? Like, why would you come be a part of? So the only reason you're in Congress, if you hate America as it is, the only reason then you would become a person in Congress is to overthrow the government. That's it. It's not to cause change. It's not to improve things. It's not to make America better. No, it's to actually overthrow it. There's no other conclusion. Because the only reason that you go into someone's house that you hate is to throw them out of their own house and to take it over or to burn it down or to steal and rob from it. I mean, that's the only reason you do that. It doesn't matter what the justification is. It doesn't matter what you say about it. Scientific socialism versus religion. It is also worth noting that Siad Barre's regime officially adhered to a political ideology he called scientific socialism. Wow. Well, basically you're saying atheist socialism. So basically that's communist Russia, that's Lenin Marxist, that's Chinese communism. While Barre tried to merge certain aspects of Islam with Marxist-Leninist ideas. Okay, well there's the problem. Right? There's why you had rebels, apparently. To keep the public happy, his government was deeply secular in its execution of power. That means demonic. When you say secular, that means demonic. That means without empathy, without guilt, remorse, without compassion, without allowing people to repent, without hearings or trials. Without allowing people to, secular means without allowing them to prove their innocence. Well, you can't prove your innocence without allowing them to rebut allegations of guilt. Okay? The altered traditional Islamic inheritance. So, he executed several conservative Islamic scholars who protested against government laws that altered traditional Islamic inheritance structures. So he was amoral. This is a very disgusting person, this dictator. And he murdered people because they were conservative and not liberal. And Ilhan Omar's father was a colonel who executed those orders and participated in executing hundreds of thousands of people, civilians, based on their religious beliefs and practices of their own religion. So what do you think they're going to do if they're in power? If she were the president of this country, what do you think she would do to people who are not of their own religion? Well, they'd be murdered first. And then if they were a little too conservative for her, if they were Islamists in her own religion, and they were too conservative, well, what would happen next? Well, she's not any different. Her acts, her words, her apathy, her contempt, her vitriol that comes out of her mouth while she's in Congress, while she does media, reacts to media and things. They try to paint her with these beautiful pictures and stuff, but this is a very, very, very disturbed person mentally. Like, very. Look at the history she grew up with. This is a very dark mental person. Now, on the surface, she's gonna present herself as this beautiful thing, but this is not a beautiful person. Oh my God. Therefore, the destruction of northern cities, the mass executions, and resulting man-made famines. They created the famines. These people didn't have to starve to death. They starved them to death. Like, this was malicious. This was premeditated murder of these people. Because they were conservative. This is why the Democrat Party is the enemy of America. They have become infected with this disease. Okay? This ethos. They're infected with. Every single one of them are infected with it. If they don't detract from that, if they don't stand up against this kind of person like Ilhan Omar and AOC and Rashid Habib or whatever her name is, if they don't stand up against it, then they're choosing it. If they're choosing this is a descendant of somebody who was raised by a murderer because people were too conservative. In Islam, think about that. They were murdered because they were conservative in the most violently extreme religion in the world. Jihad. All right. These people were too conservative, so they were murdered by Sunnis, people of their own religion. Just get your head wrapped around that for a second. If they had disdain, and she's raised by a man who carried out those executions and ordered them. Now, he may not have held the gun, but he ordered them. He didn't say, I can't do that. You know, God, Allah, doesn't allow me to go out and murder my own people like that. No. He's like, okay. Ordered it. People carried it out. Man, wow. Extreme brutal force to crush clan-based political opposition. So that's what they want to do to Republicans. You think that this isn't the same spirit that controls Ilhan Omar and multiple dozen people in the Democratic Party today, the Democratic Socialists? This guy was a socialist, scientific socialism. I just can't even. This is just absolutely, gripping me to my core. I am deeply disturbed now. I had no idea before this morning, and before I started doing these videos, and I scanned through all this stuff, and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting, so I'm going to make a video about it. Now that I'm reading it to you, and I'm actually going through it with you, it's like I don't understand how people can't see through the facade of people like Ilhan Omar. Look at who she is. This is who she is. This is her DNA. This is where her DNA was stitched from. Okay, this man inseminated a woman that created Ilhan Omar. All his DNA, his thoughts and everything, that comes a little bit later. Shaping the environment around her, extended mind hypothesis and all that kind of stuff that shaped her actual cognitive wiring, her psyche, and became who she is spiritually, was shaped by this man and his acts and the fact that he was well loved by everybody who knew him. Whew. And he carried out these mass executions of people, clan-based political opposition. Basically, Republican versus Democrat. She's a Democrat, so if they were in power, they would. What is she going to advocate for? What does she already advocate for? I mean, it's no secret how much hatred she has for you in this country, the very land that she walks on. It's repugnant to her. There's no question of what she would do if she was in ultimate power. If she were a governor of the state, if she were a president of the country. My next question. Have those Marxist-Lenin beliefs been influenced via Chinese aid support during Barre reign or after? Now, this gets very... Don't take what is said here on the surface, okay, of this response, because I'm going to follow up with another question about this. And it says no. On the surface, it searched 12 sites. All this happens in a split second. So like I said, this is not depth of knowledge at any rate. If there were classifications of depth of knowledge, this is like 0.5. It's not even 1. Depth of knowledge 1, okay? And it goes down, layers of depth of knowledge, depending on your research, goes down, 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 down. Kind of like this whole rabbit hole we're on right now. No. Siad Barre's Marxist-Leninist beliefs were not fundamentally shaped or influenced by China. His ideology was almost entirely shaped by the Soviet Union. Okay, well, that's because he's basically after World War II, okay, a dictator in Somalia after World War II, and so, yeah, that makes sense. However, China played a massive role in funding and sustaining his regime. Wow. So not only USAID money, but in collusion with Chinese money to keep him in power and to resist the rebels, Adid, and the rebels. That's what's mind-blowing. That USAID money from the Democrats that flowed under Clinton, although Clinton ultimately shut it down, and Bush began it. Whew. But we know that, well, I'm not going to go any farther on that. Okay, that's just the facts, and that's in this conversation, and that's well supported by documentation used, even though it is depth of knowledge 1. His regime through economic aid, both during his reign and via diplomatic support long after it collapsed. So, USAID money in collusion with Chinese money provided diplomatic support. God bless for these humanitarian crises. Well, supposedly we were providing humanitarian aid to these people who were being starved to death. But Chinese money was propping, I guess according to this, directly propping it up. And there's there's 2 links there. So we'll see what those links are if they're legit. The roots of the ideology, purely Soviet. When Barre took power in 1969, military coup. 1969 military coup. Cultural revolution. My God. Now it's all making sense, right? The hippie generation, cultural revolution in the United States. Che Guevara, cultural revolution. Everything that's attached to a cultural revolution is communist, socialist. So they've been doing it since the 60s here in the United States as well. Barre took power in 1969. He declared Somalia a Marxist-Leninist state and adopted scientific socialism. This was modeled directly after Soviet doctrine. Barre had been trained in Italy and closely aligned with Moscow. The Soviet Union flooded Somalia with billions of dollars in military hardware and trained Barre's intelligence officers. Wow. Including senior commanders like Nur Omar Mohammed. Oh my God. So the Soviet Union trained Nur Omar Mohammed. What? This is Ilhan Omar's dad. The superficial facade. Historians largely agree that Barre was never a deeply committed communist philosopher. He used Marxist-Leninism as a pragmatic tool to secure Soviet weapons and to justify crushing the Somali clan system under a highly centralized totalitarian state. My God. China's role during Barre's reign. I mean, this all screams somebody who we don't want in Congress and something we don't want going on in the United States of America. Any scintilla of this, if they haven't repented of this, turned their backs on this, if her daughter hasn't denounced her father and what he did, being part of that regime, then that's somebody we don't want around. We don't want any of that anywhere rooted in the United States. This is an absolute enemy of the United States of America. Enemy of freedoms and liberty, obviously. For being conservative, they were murdered for being conservative, right? Conservative Muslims. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. The most violent religion in the world. China's role during Barre's reign, the economic lifeline. While China did not inspire Barre's ideology, it became his economic savior during the Cold War. Wow. Well, people worship saviors, right? Jesus Christ is the savior of the world. Christians worship him. The Great Realignment, 1970. In 1970, Barre launched the Ogaden War to invade neighboring Ethiopia. Ethiopians. So they starved out the Ethiopians too. The Soviet Union chose to switch sides and back Ethiopia, forcing a furious Barre to completely expel all Soviet advisors from Somalia. Okay, so China steps in. So, wow, okay. Good cop, bad cop routine. China steps in, looking to counter Soviet influence in Africa. Beijing eagerly stepped into the vacuum. They weren't looking to counter it, they were looking to supplement it. They are the same. Beijing eagerly stepped into the vacuum. China did not try to change Barre's ideology. Instead, they provided massive, zero strings attached economic and technical aid. Right, zero strings attached. So who's he loyal to? So who is Omar's dad going to be loyal to? Their savior. Not Christian America. Infrastructure achievements. Chinese state funds built the most critical infrastructure during the Barre era. This included the highway, the Mogadishu Stadium, and major agricultural irrigation networks. Wow. Wow. China's support after the regime collapsed. China's loyalty to the Barre regime was so deep that it technically outlived the dictatorship itself. So Somalia is controlled by China. When Barre was overthrown in 1991 and Somalia plunged into total anarchy, the Somali ambassador to Beijing, Mohammed Hassan Said, who had been handpicked by Barre's government, was left completely stranded. Proving the longevity of their diplomatic stance, the Chinese government continued to officially recognize this Barre-era ambassador as the sole legitimate representative of Somalia for 14 years thereafter. 14 years after the state collapsed, finally replacing him only in 2005 when a new transitional government emerged. Soft power and government influence. Just skipping down, the Chinese Communist Party now invites hand-picked delegations of Somalia. Hand-picked. They pick the delegations of Somali lawmakers, and so they fund those people to Beijing for mandatory seminars in the Chinese model of authoritarian governance, state-led capitalism, and soft power infrastructure expansion. Wow. Okay. Sources. EBSCO. Okay. Well, Wikipedia. Washington Post. Sure. Wow. New York Times, Somali National News. Okay, so Horn Observer, legitimate sources. Lots of legitimate sources. Okay, so my question then became, so we could sum up, because remember the original question was, are there banks operating in China? How did Bernie Sanders get the alleged, if it's true, like how could he, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying he did, or I'm not definitive because we don't know. It's just an allegation. That he has $17 million in Chinese bank account. That's not disclosed to the IRS, by the way. So we could sum up that the civil war in Somalia was overthrow a brutal communist regime led by Barre and Nur Omar, heavily supported by Chinese money. I'm a little fuzzy about how Nur Omar gained refugee status in the U.S. with daughter Ilhan. Obviously, CIA was operating in Mogadishu 2 years prior to the Black Hawk Down incident. Reframing civil war. The Barre regime was officially a Marxist-Leninist state. It is a slight miscarriage to say the civil wars fought to explicitly overthrow communism. I'm getting hungry, so I'm losing my mind. It's been an hour and a half going through this. How Nur Omar gained refugee status. There we go. The flight to Kenya. Massive screening gap. Boils down. U.S. refugee admissions program boils down to a massive screening gap. Sure. During the chaotic mid-1990s refugee crisis. Okay. So maybe they had... Oh, God. Okay. Wow. So they took advantage of a screening gap. The flight to Kenya. So it sounds like covert operations. I'm just all I'm saying. The flight to Kenya. When the Barre regime collapsed in January 1991, his military officers became immediate targets for execution by the incoming rebel militias. Nur Omar Mohammed fled Mogadishu with his young daughter, Ilhan, and spent 4 years living in the Utang refugee camp near Mombasa, Kenya. Where is Obama's family from? Is it Mombasa? I don't know. UN-US screening blind spot. In 1995, the family was approved for resettlement in the United States during the mid-1990s. When did Obama come to the United States? When did he immigrate? Was he born? He was born in Hawaii, but when did they immigrate? There's a lot of fuzziness there. Was it about this same time when there was a quote unquote blind spot? And U.S. immigration, we have a big blind spot too. Joe Biden literally wrote an executive order to destroy the border. And we had a big old blind spot there for 4 years. You see how that works? During the mid-90s, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in the U.S. Of course, when you want to traffic humans, you're always going to have that sort of blind spot. They kind of have that blind spot. Ilhan Omar apparently had that blind spot, and so did the Attorney General and Governor Walz and others, Supreme Court people, all the way down. They all had a blind spot, apparently, in Minnesota while these hundreds of millions of dollars were walking out in suitcases full of cash back to Somalia. See how all that works? A little blind spot. Oh, we had a blind spot. California had a blind spot. They actually legislated blind spots so that nobody could be caught for fraud, so that it's legal. Apparently, New Jersey had a blind spot because they didn't find anybody. And then all of a sudden, they found 6,000. And now all of a sudden, it's up to 75,000. So they apparently had a blind spot. Oh, we didn't notice it. It was blind spot. You see what all that kind of language is? Hey, I picked up on that language. But there's no such thing in government as a blind spot. Okay? The faceless refugee reality. Unless an individual was widely recognized as top-tier general, explicit war crimes, and nobody flagged them. BS. You're going to flag a colonel, for God's sakes. That's a high-ranking officer. Captain, colonel. CIA operations prior to Black Hawk Down. Yes, CIA was operating before 1993, obviously, in the 2 years prior. 1991 evacuation, 1992 return. Okay. Well, then I asked, so how did Ilhan Omar grow up with her father's influence, and how did he become so wealthy and influential in the United States? How did a taxi driver daughter, if they're just, there's millions of taxi drivers. None of their daughters are Congress. How many of them, what percentage of them are in Congress right now? I'd say next to zero. That's probably a 0.0. Maybe Ilhan Omar is the only one. The premise that he was wealthy, elite in America, financial, I could be wrong, but in the comments. I'm not saying I'm right. It's just It's just highly improbable in my mind that that's possible. The reality of this life in the U.S., because the point is, USAID funds went to them to prop up the regime and keep it going in Somalia, then followed them to Kenya. It's likely that some of those funds followed them back to the United States. Not saying it did. Not saying it did. But seems probable. Firmly working class guy. They have WITSEC programs, right? Witness protection programs. People live out their lives as if they're somebody else. Okay, all kinds of, and they go daily to do these things, but they're in witness protection. Who knows? I don't know. Just saying it happens. The family arrived in Arlington, Virginia. Interesting. They arrived in Arlington, Virginia, isn't it? Not New York, Atlanta, Georgia, Chicago, Arlington, Virginia. With almost no material wealth after spending 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya. Well, how do they afford a place to live? He did hold significant social capital within the Somali diaspora community in Minneapolis. Kind of like it was made to exist. His influence came from, if he was just some taxi driver on the streets in New York City and he just went there to live, They brought over a lot of people from Somalia, from that regime, aligned with that regime, to America. They created a diaspora community in Minneapolis. USAID money made it happen. Apparently. That's what it seems like. That seems like how it's connected here. Without saying it in this conversation. Not my conversation, I'm reading it, okay, from this output. Community elder. In Somali culture, elders are deeply revered. Okay, so he had instant status here in the United States in this diaspora community. Political mentor. Okay, I'm not saying, and he was an intelligent guy. He was in charge of education over there. Education into what? Islam. Into the scientific socialism of the dictator. Not education like in America. No. Inundated with why killing all those conservative Sunnis was good. They were educated with that, and he was in charge of it. Because people are going to ask questions. Well, they're naturally, biologically, you're wired to have empathy for other humans. When you lack it, it's because you were educated to lack it. Either you were physically abused, or psychologically abused, or emotionally abused, so that those networks would be depressed and shut down. And other networks linked to apathy, contempt, hate would become more efficient over time because of how you were, quote unquote, educated or treated. Ilhan Omar's upbringing under his wing. Ilhan Omar's upbringing was defined by, you see how warmly, AI is just collecting this from the web, okay? But you see how warmly they present it. Under his wing, defined by the contrast between her father's former status and their immigrant reality. Democratic values. Her father and grandfather, Abubakar Omar, that'd be an interesting person to find out about him as well, were fascinated by the American democratic process. They often discussed politics at home, framing participation in democracy as a privilege they had lost in Somalia. That's hilarious. He was in charge of losing it for everybody, murdering people and enforcing scientific socialism of the dictator. It's funny how that's framed. The translator role. Because her father and grandfather were fluent in political concepts, but initially less fluent in English, blah, 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 she accompanied her father to local Democratic Farmer Labor Party caucuses at age 14. Nothing says socialism and communism more than that. Democratic, farmer, labor, anybody that says the word democratic and democracy is your enemy. They're the enemy of America because America is a constitutional republic where rights are derived by God, not rights derived by men in power, just like the man-made famine. God didn't create that famine. Man created that famine that murdered those conservative Islam Sunnis. And the man that created it was Barre, Siad Barre. And the colonel who helped enforce it was Ilhan Omar's father. And so when they came over here, she accompanied her grandfather. Well, obviously the grandfather is going to have some kind of political standing in that government as well, because the son was a colonel. So the grandfather is going to have some kind of residual affiliation and influence and standing in the government over there, and became person over here. And she accompanied him to communist think tanks, caucuses at the age of 14. That's where she was influenced, apparently. Her specific entry point into Minnesota politics. So from 14, she was groomed by these organizations, these socialist organizations in Minnesota. Breeding ground. Resilience. Growing up in a single-parent household. Her mother died when she was 2. So just her father and her grandfather in a refugee camp. Single-parent household in a refugee camp, and then facing bullying in U.S. schools. You know, that's her account. Well, maybe because you were a total unempathic socialist communist in America growing up. Maybe because you had such apathy, contempt, and hate for America because you participated in accordance with your father and grandfather's beliefs in socialism, which is completely averse to a country who just came out of World War II and Vietnam fighting the spread of socialism. And many of those people in your school were probably sons and daughters of veterans who saw brothers and sisters give their lives to stop socialism. No, I imagine that you were the bully, to be honest. Trying to bully others in U.S. schools to believe in a fiction that socialism, scientific socialism, is good for everybody. But, you know, you're going to spin that however you want. But I'm sure AI pulled it from the web, you know, because that's what AI has access to, cursory. She has cited her father's relentless optimism and demand for excellence as a primary driver of her ambition. No, he was using her as a proxy to drive her to become who she is. It's not relentless optimism. It's relentless hate. Relentless hate. And the discussions they had, obviously, related to Democratic Farmer Labor Party caucuses, was anti-American hatred. These are all DSA kind of crap. You know, Democratic Socialists of America. These are all those kind of think tanks, these kind of caucuses. They hate America. They hate America the way it is, capitalism. It's funny they hate capitalism, and she stands up against capitalism, but that was what China imported into Somalia to support her family's regime. What they were aligned to in Somalia. They're always hypocrites. Okay, but that has been outed publicly. She married her brother. Okay, basically it says is there's no official documentation or concrete proof. But again, that proof has come out. Okay, that proof has come out. I think it's actually come out in Senate committee hearings, as a matter of fact. But that's come out in media. Even though they keep trying to hush that down, press that down. It's outed. The context and timeline, first relationships. Okay, so this right here, first relationship, age 19, they had 2 children. The legal marriage, age 26, to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Okay. Reunited, 2012. Marriage to Elmi ended religiously. Legal divorces and remarriage because she was still technically married on government paperwork to Elmi. She legally divorced him in 2017. In 2018, she legally married Hirsi. They later divorced. So all of these are back and forth with Hirsi and Elmi. I think so they don't get caught. Voice of America. So all these links, we'll look at the links they use to make sure it's a little bit where the brother accusation comes from. The rumor was first published. Okay, so there's whatever fact check verdict, or like Snopes and PolitiFact. Well, we know those are BS. Those have been outed long ago as being total BS propaganda machines of the Democratic left. So we don't care what they say, and that's not even legitimate. But the rumors gained traction because investigative journalists from outlets like Minnesota Star Tribune found that during the years legally married to Elmi, her public life, social media activity, and even some tax filings remained highly intertwined with her first partner, Ahmed Hirsi. So I don't know what you know about INS immigration scams, but women from other countries will come here to the United States and commit this same kind of. So they will be in a process to into the United States, but it takes longer. So then they'll come in to the United States on a visitor visa or something, then try to get married to a U.S. citizen right away. So it changes their status to be able to get a green card, et cetera, et cetera. But they are actually already married to somebody else in another country. Okay, so then I asked the question, irregardless of whether it is her bio brother or not, these circumstances constitute textbook INS immigration fraud by marriage. These circumstances surrounding the marriage time had led multiple legal experts and political opponents to argue that the situation carries all the hallmarks of immigration or administrative fraud. And yes, it does. I know because I got involved in it. I was involved in a fraud marriage exactly like that. Married to 2 people at the same time. I didn't find out till after I was married, but it all came out and caused a big problem in our marriage, and that's why I was only married 2 years, because it's completely fraud. It's complete fraud. And ironically, she was the one who filed for divorce, claimed me of all kinds of BS. Of course she did, but chronic habitual liar. But of course, because I got wrapped up in believing a total lie that she loved me and that she wanted to have kids and marry me and have a life together and blah blah. It was not that it was all for citizenship. We met as teachers, and she was on a special kind of visa, just part of a program from her country to teach her language in the United States. And we met as teachers, and I was lied to the whole time. We were married maybe almost a year later, and then of course it was all very rapid, very sudden. And then after we were married, we shared a computer, and that's where it all came out. It was really bad. It was really bad. So I know the horror of it, and I'm still going through it. 13 years later, I'm still suffering from it. So these circumstances, it's immigration administrative fraud. While U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has never formally charged the immigration fraud, documented discrepancies in her marriage tax filings did result in official state penalties and ongoing scrutiny. What were these official state penalties? I don't know. The basis of... Anyway, so because she's lied about it, it's obvious on its face. It is what it is. Proven illegal and administrative violations. While immigration fraud charges were never filed, the overlapping marriages led to other verified legal infractions. So, it's like a cascading snowball effect. You lie once, you have to lie again, and it becomes a whole web of lies, and then, that leads to criminal acts, and et cetera, joint filing, tax filing problems, Finance violations. I mean, dang, bro. The board ordered her to personally reimburse her campaign thousands of dollars. Well, okay, what about the missing winery, $17 million? Why no federal immigration public file charges were filed? Because Elmi resided in the UK and both parties maintained that the marriage was romantically legitimate at the time, federal authorities did not pursue formal charges. Oh, of course. Because, you just have to say, and they assume that you're telling the truth. Because you say it under threat, under perjury, or under oath of perjury and threat of perjury and all that kind of stuff. Investigating every single thing it's impractical. That's why they flooded the system with the open borders, because you can't investigate. It's just impossible to investigate everything. That's why you have to take military action, because you just got to get rid of them. There's no way you can investigate them and give them any kind of quarter, because all of that takes time, and that's what they exploited. That's what they exploited with the open border policies. They knew that. It's a swarm. How are you going to stop the swarm of hornets? You're going to get stung multiple times, and you might die. Then that's what's happened to the U.S. That's why you have to take care of it the way the Trump administration has been taking care of it. It's only recourse. Anyway, the details. What was the next question? But now there's serious ties to her accountability to billions of dollars Somali fraud, fake winery, Bernie Sanders. Okay, now we're getting back to, you see how to go through all those other questions in that history to get back to the original question: does China have banks? Okay, how did he get millions of dollars into without the IRS knowing it? Well, we got suitcases of money going out of the country. Okay, everybody's turning their head. There's a blind spot to it, but they got caught. And then apparently Bernie Sanders is now alleged to have a million. So that's what we're trying to discover now. I've had to ask all those other questions. It's now taken an hour and 45 minutes to get to this. Just in this one conversation. Now, that doesn't mean the time that took to ask all these questions. And anyway, the details connecting Ilhan Omar's husband's dealings, the Minnesota fraud scandal, and Bernie Sanders required clarification based on verified federal filings and investigation updates. The fake winery and the $30 million disclosure scandal, House sudden valuation jump in her 2024 finals of Omar. And you can stop and pause and read it, whenever, as you need to. Two companies owned by her husband, Tim Minette. Okay, so now there's another husband. It kind of makes the other two that she prior had as husbands fake, fraud, right? Kind of makes it sound like fraud. I don't know. People have multiple husbands, but when it nets in personal gain, something like citizenship or something like that, then it just, I don't know, leans to me towards being a scam, especially when they're both overlapping during the same time periods, et cetera, et cetera. Tim Minette, a California-based wine company called ES St. Crew LLC. What the heck is that all about? And venture capital firm Rose Lake Capital had suddenly ballooned in value. I wonder if Rose Lake Capital is anyway, I'm not going to go down that tangent. The winery went from $1 million to $5 million, value of $15,000 to over $5 million, driving her net worth upwards $30 million, outing investigation. Operated out of a shared virtual address, meaning it didn't even exist. Lacked traditional physical storefront operations and had been sued by past investigators alleging fraud. Wow. Wonder if that's how they funneled USAID money to her. So USAID money going overseas, shifting into other accounts, and then funneling back into the United States. That's what Comer said was going on. Not in this specific instance, but I'm saying it follows the same pattern. The accounting error and disillusion following intense public, her office blamed a massive accounting error. Saying the accountant mistakenly listed the entire estimated value of the businesses rather than her husband's actual minor stake. The updated filing lowered the value of both companies to zero. Well, what that got to do with her husband's minor stake if the actual accounts were zero? The companies that value were both zero. How did he have a minor stake in a company valued at zero? Again, that's just total fraud. It just screams fraud. 9 days after, and this is the icing on the cake. Look at this. 9 days after this correction, the winery officially dissolved and shut down. It didn't shut down for how many years? 2024 financial disclosure. How many years was in operation? It doesn't say. We don't know, according to this. But it dissolved 9 days after the scrutiny, the accounting error. But how did it have valuation? Trump got in trouble for overvaluing his properties. Letitia James took him to court over that. How come? This is obvious on its face that they overvalued it because they adjusted it to the valuation of zero, from 30 million to zero. So however long it was in existence, it was overvalued, and they were getting funding and loans and mortgage, whatever they were getting from it, was all fraud. 9 days afterwards, it was shut down. Wow. This is the kind of person who's sitting in that seat in Congress. Okay. This is a Democrat, a vehement, violent, vitriolic, vitiated Democrat who hates America. Why anybody in her party is aligned with someone who hates America, openly condemns it, wants to overthrow it. Why anyone in that party is aligned with that? Everybody in the party needs to be thrown out of Congress because they are a threat to the safety and security and the freedoms, pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness of every single American and U.S. citizen. Every single one of them are. If they're aligned with her and she's doing all this stuff and they don't condemn her and excommunicate her and censor her, then they're choosing it. They're making it okay. And they're making you out to be the enemy because you want accountability. That's exactly what they did in her country when they murdered the conservative Sunni population of Somaliland by the hundreds of thousands. And this is the product of that in Congress, now persuading others to align with her. Dark, very dark mental health disorder. Okay. She's wired in her brain to be pure evil. Unabashed, unashamed, no empathy, no compassion, no guilt, no remorse for anything she does or anything she says. That is the ultimate evil. The link to the Somali fraud scandal. Okay, the billions of Somalia feeding our future, the connection, many of the individuals, 250 million intended, there we go, intended to feed low-income children. It's the same fraud they used in Somalia. Same blueprint. The fraud went through all these companies that are supposed to be feeding those kids, but yet Barre and her father starved them to death and committed mass executions of them. And they stole the money that's supposed to go to feed low-income children. Most of them, many of them black, their own colored people. They're starving them to death. They don't care if they starve to death without food. They stole that money. Then they use it to prop up restaurants and daycares that had nobody in them. They used food stamps to buy products, then resold them. The cavalier, the Machiavellianism of this. It's just beyond. It's hard to wrap your head around it. This is why most people deny that any wrongdoing exists, because they can't get their head wrapped around it. Literally, this takes a very, 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 very high level of intellectual ability, cognitive capacity to not only get just to get your head wrapped around it, not to just premeditate it and to execute the plan, but just get your head wrapped around it. And that a person, because most people have empathy. You see that most people grow up with empathy, some shred of it. No matter how bad a situation they grow up in, and there's only a very minor percentage of people who lack empathy. Small percentage, 1% to 2%. But those who do, wow. Like this person, wow. So they have some kind of empathy, you know. So it's hard for them to even believe that somebody like Ilhan Omar could exist to do those things. And so since they can't fathom it, then they believe everything else is conspiracy theory and ridiculous, you know, because they can't get their head wrapped around it, that someone could be this evil. Anyway, so they don't disalign themselves from it. They don't separate themselves from it. While the arrests of fugitives fleeing have kept the case in the headlines, federal prosecutors have not produced or Omar, blah, 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 Bernie Sanders, Chinese bank account claim. The claim is fabricated viral internet rumor by Nick Shirley. You know, that's cursory. If it grabs stuff from Snopes and PolitiFact, then we know that it's grabbing stuff from total BS disinformation sources. Okay, but then I'm like, I challenge it. But your research is extremely inefficient, and you're glossing over the suitcase of cash caught leaving the country. It's like, how could that money flow to Chinese interests in Somalia? How could it? What's a way? Is there a way? Do not connect directly to Chinese interests. Instead, federal investigators have traced this massive cash trail. Now here's the treasure trove. They've already traced it to networks and global financial havens like Dubai, where the money is laundered before returning to East Africa. The real cash story behind the suitcases of cash. The real story behind the suitcases of cash. Federal law enforcement and congressional hearings revealed massive financial movements at Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, St. Paul International Airport. The scale. The Transportation Security Administration flagged nearly $700 million. $700 million in physical cash carried out in the luggage of a small group of Somali American money couriers, mules. This amounted to roughly one. Where do you get? You're telling me a bunch of inbreds, Somali refugees, okay, who've never even gone to school, hardly, somehow collected $700 million of physical cash by themselves. No effing way. No effing way. Well, you can't even go get $10,000 out of your own bank account in cash without massive scrutiny from the bank. Go try it. Go try it. Go try to get $5,000 out in cash without scrutiny from the bank, without having to sign multiple kinds of forms. 700 million. You just don't get it unless it's from some NGO or some criminal organization. It's just not going to happen. Okay. This amounted to roughly $1 million per day. $1 million per day. Where do you get $1 million? How many passengers is that? Somalians going to Somalia. I mean, if you made it if you made it $2,000 each, that might not get flagged. Okay, well, $2,000 into $1 million. There's not enough flights in the world to make $1 million a day leave. So all of this is criminal enterprise. Okay, exactly what 42 USC in 1983, 5, 7. You know, that whole numbered order of U.S. codes. That's what they call conspiracy. There's got to be dozens and dozens of people involved in this. Why they weren't arrested on site? Okay, because carrying large amounts of cash is legal if it is declared. TSA and customs officers are technically forced to wave them through. Blah blah BS. The legal crackdown in response. Stop. You know, they didn't see some ragtag Somali person with $500,000 or $100,000 in their suitcase and declared they didn't think anything about bullshit. You know, you get on here and you can watch on YouTube. You can watch customs enforcement, like in Australia. Anytime someone has declared a certain level, like more than $10,000, they pull them aside. They pull them aside. They ask lots of questions. Well, what's it for? You know, you can watch it on YouTube. They have it. Okay. BS that in America TSA just let them walk on through. Legal crackdown. They probably had specific agents, okay, involved in reviewing this. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe it is. Maybe it's all innocent. They declared it. They got to walk through. Nobody else is involved. The legal crackdown. In response, John Cornyn and Marshall Blackburn introduced Stop Somali Currency from leaving the country. Do you want to know why your inflation is so high? Well, so how much was that? $700 million in physical cash left this country to go to. That causes inflation. It devalues the dollar. Right? Ooh, boy. That's a residual effect. Okay. Thank God for Blackburn and Cornyn. How the money actually flows. Okay, so here's how it flows, folks. Here's how it's laundered. How the money actually flows. The Dubai Hawala route. Now, again, this is not me. This is sourced. Okay? Look, it's all sourced. House government, John Cornyn's page. Rather than heading into Chinese channels, the cash flows highly specific traditional financial route. Again, we're getting back to that question. How can Bernie Sanders have an undisclosed IRS, unknown to the IRS, bank account? How is that allegation even possible? I don't know that he does. But how could that even be possible? We've had to go through 2 hours of investigation here and discussion just to get to that answer. And we're almost there because we're right here. It flows through this Dubai Hawala route. Okay. Well, what is that? You can read it. All right. FBI believe the FBI believe bulk of the cash consists of laundered proceeds from massive pandemic era. That's the PPE funds and daycare fraud schemes centered in Minnesota, such as Feeding Our Future case. The transit to Dubai. Couriers routinely book flights from Minnesota to Minneapolis to Dubai via Amsterdam. Dubai serves as a primary global hub for washing unexplained physical currency. So they declare they've got it. Oh, okay, you can leave with it. No big deal. No laws against taking money out of the United States by the millions and causing inflation for everybody else. BS. The Hawala system. Then they wash it in Dubai. Once the US dollars land in Dubai, they enter the Hawala network. This is an ancient, informal, trust-based, oh God, money transfer system that operates entirely outside of traditional Western and Chinese commercial banking systems. Traditional is the key word there. Western and Chinese commercial banking systems. What about non-traditional systems? Doesn't mention that. We're going to get to that in a second, though, because I asked a follow-up question. The destination. Through the Hawala network, the value of that cash is instantly transferred. Oh my God, this is a second hour already. Okay, well, I'm going to end it after this question. We'll make a third episode. The destination through the Hawala network, the value of that cash is instantly transferred to merchants and networks inside Somalia or neighboring regions. Bada bing, bada boom. Now the connection. It's back in Somalia. But there's no Chinese, as already said, there's no Chinese banks in Somalia. Okay, so we're going to get to that. You might have to listen to the third episode because I'm going to cut it off because it's already been an hour. I don't know how long I can post, like how big files I can post. Instagram fly, a significant portion of money is diverted to fund local corruption. Real estate grabs in East Africa, or terrorism via the insurgent group Al-Shabaab. So is she connected? Is their family connected to Al-Shabaab? Quite frankly, they might be. While China has aggressive economic interest, they rely on formal state-backed contracts and resource trading, whereas the airport cash exodus is entirely an underground local network utilizing Middle Eastern financial havens. And you wonder why we're in Iran, trying to destroy these terrorist networks. Iran's the number one funder of terrorism. Well, kind of looks like Dubai is now. If you want to look into the mechanics further, we can Hawala network bypass the standard banking or check the status of federal money laundering trials tied to airport crew as well. You know what? You can do your own search to answer those questions. Those are good questions, okay? John Cornyn, okay. Senator Cornyn, Congress, House.gov, I mean, FBI, whatever. IX site, I don't know what that is. The Guardian, Iran Online, BBC. You know, these are legitimate news sources. Congress.gov, Springer, the role of mobile money. Wow. Well, there's published, peer-reviewed published research on Springer, Nature link. Okay, so, dang, bro. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop this one, and we're going to start a third episode. And then we're going to get to the real crux of how this is linked together and how Bernie Sanders could have, the allegation could be true, that he could have a hidden money account away from IRS that's linked to a Chinese bank account. Okay, we're going to show that here next, in this next question. It actually links it.